Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. This poster is titled Frequency of Racial Microaggressions Predicts Poor Mental Health Outcomes for Filipino, Filipina, Filipinx Americans. My name is Janelle Salcedo and my pronouns are she, her. I graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas this past spring in psychology and am a research assistant at the Game Lab. This project and poster was done with Aldo, Barrita, a psychology graduate student, and Dr. Gloria Wong-Padoongpatt, an assistant professor in psychology at UNLV. Starting off with some research background, the Filipina, Filipinx, Filipino American population, or FilAms and FAs, as I'll be referring to in this presentation, is one of the fastest growing populations in the US, especially among Asian sub-ethnic groups. In 2019, there were 4.2 million FilAms in the US, according to the US Census Bureau. And in particular in Las Vegas, where we collected our data, has a growing FilAm population. In 2020, it was estimated that more than 200,000 FilAms lived in Vegas. And although the group is growing, research about FilAms' mental health is still scarce. It is important to explore and understand the different factors influencing their mental health to help inform practices and policies. Previous research has shown how racial microaggressions impact mental health. For those of you who don't know, racial microaggressions refers to behavioral and verbal forms of everyday discrimination that are subtle. The consequences of racial microaggressions can impact mental health outcomes, and understanding those consequences are critical in addressing mental health issues and disparities in FilAms. Though that is often difficult since Asian Americans are often viewed as a monolith in society and in research, FilAms may differ from other Asian American ethnic groups due to differences in cultural values, colonialism, and colorism. And disaggregating data is critical in understanding the lived experiences and addressing issues specific to FilAms. In order to understand that, the project aimed to explore how racial microaggressions impact FA mental health outcomes and in comparison to non-FA Asian Americans. Moving on to the methods, for this project, 232 college students volunteered and participated in an online Qualtrics survey. The study required that participants were 18 and older, speak English, live in the US, and identify as a racial or ethnic minority. The sample only included Asian Americans, and within that, then were grouped into the FA group and the non-FA group. For measures, the project used quantitative measures, REM and DAS. So REMS is short for Racial and Ethnic Microaggression Scale, and it was used to measure the microaggression experiences of participants, and DAS is short for depression, anxiety, stress scales. And it was just measured to see the depression, anxiety, and stress of participants. And that was a self-report scale. As for demographics, these pie charts on the poster show a breakdown of the sample. The sample only includes Asian Americans, as I previously mentioned, and included 114 FilAms and 118 non-FilAms Asian Americans. And most of the participants were male with over 59%. And many participants were also high school graduates and second generation, meaning they were born in the US and at least one of their parents immigrated to the US. Moving on to our different hypotheses. Our first hypothesis was that the FilAm group will experience more racial microaggressions than the non-FA group. The second hypothesis is that the FA group racial microaggressions would be a predictor of poor mental health outcomes. And the third hypothesis was that the FA group will experience poorer mental health outcomes than the non-FA group. So the graphics show the different findings. For the first hypothesis, we used a one-way ANOVA to compare the means of each group's responses and found that there weren't significant differences among the means. For the second hypothesis, a linear regression was performed with REMS and DAS scores. The overall model was marginally significant, and 26% of the variance in mental health outcomes can be explained by racial microaggressions. So that means that for the PhilAm group, the frequency of racial microaggressions were a predictor of poor mental health outcomes. Though for the non-PhilAm group, that was not the case. For the third hypothesis, we also used a one-way ANOVA to compare the means of each group's responses and found that there weren't any significant differences among the means. Overall, we found that our first and third hypothesis to be null, but the second hypothesis showed a very interesting find. So these findings suggest that the racial microaggressions, the frequency of those predicts poor mental health outcomes in the PhilAm group. This is important in expanding the literature and understanding the impact of racial microaggressions on PhilAms, since many studies categorize Asian Americans as a monolith. Racial microaggressions may impact different Asian subethnic groups differently, and so that's really important to consider. As for the reason why racial microaggressions predicts poor mental health outcomes in PhilAms, there is not a clear reason, especially since this study was more exploratory. So there needs to be further research into the mechanisms and also into why racial microaggressions did not predict mental health outcomes in the non-FA group. This would definitely provide more insight into factors that impact PhilAm mental health and help to disaggregate Asian American racial microaggressions and mental health literature. As for limitations, there were some factors within this study. Participants in the study were recruited from a university and many were second generation status. The experiences of these participants may not be representative of those from other backgrounds that are PhilAm. And this may impact the generalizability of the study. However, these findings contribute to the literature of racial microaggressions, and clinicians should definitely take racial microaggressions into consideration and work to address their impact on mental health outcomes. And so that is it for my presentation. The references are listed below. Take a look if you would like. And thank you so much for spending some time with me and stopping by my poster. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by my Q&A session or on Sunday or message me. Salamat, ad yaman.